Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of this year's season of Science on Screen. My name is Dan Hudson. I'm the executive director here, and really excited to have this film in particular, which I think is one of the very best films made of all time. No exaggeration. If you've never seen it before, excuse me, or if you've never seen it on the big screen, you are in for a treat. This film makes liberal use of Alfonso Cuarón's mise-en-scène and long takes for some truly immersive filmmaking experience, which is truly a delight on the big screen. And this film has only grown more prescient and more urgent in the years since its release about 20 years ago. And it imagines a world in 2027, which is tomorrow, essentially. Each night in this series about eco-disaster, we're examining both the real science behind the type of natural disaster in the movie and the likelihood at which it might occur. Is there science fiction or science fact happening in the film? And also taking a look at it from a social science standpoint and how we might imagine that humans might truly react to the scenarios in these films. And what are these films often made many years ago? What do they teach us about today? And what do they still have to say to us? Normally, I have two academics in conversations with each other, bringing those two different vantage points to the films. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, Tim Lebeski is not going to be able to join us this evening, but I'm still really excited and happy to have and would love to invite to the stage Mohamad Junaid, Associate Professor of Sociology, Anthropology, and Social Work at MCLA. Welcome, Mohamad.
Thank you so much, Dan, for having me here.
So I know this is more Tim's specialty and kind of his jumping off point for this film. But this film, the disaster that is happening is that humans are infertile, and it's imagining what sort of cascading crises that would mean for our political systems, our societal systems, our religious systems, and from that standpoint, how does this film read to you in 2025?
Well, first of all, let me say that I watched this film way back in 2007. It came out in 2006. It was first screened in film festivals in September 2006. In 2007, I watched it, and the world looked quite different at that time. If you remember, it was a time when the primaries were happening. This was the last year of Bush presidency. We had there's a lot of hope in the air, or at least the word hope was in the air. This was right before the financial crisis, right? I was telling you how at that time, the architectural metaphor for our time was the McMansion. There was a lot of room for a lot of people. And so when this film came out, I had already read the book by P.D. James of the same name, Children of Men. And for those of you who have read their Bibles and stuff, you know that the name it has theological background, comes from the Bible. And the P.D. James had imagined a world 20 years from 1994, 1995 that would arrive at a time of this crisis in fecundity or infertility. And Alfonso Cuarón took this idea forward and as a point of departure in 2006, made this film. And I remember I thought that it's too soon. You know, it imagines the world of 2027, only 6 years after P.D. James had imagined it. And I thought that's way too soon. This is not going to happen because the world looked very different. You remember the time was also, this was the era when Europe was still like Europe. It was we were still talking about the post-national state. We were still talking about post-racial era. There was a lot of post going on at that time, and this was also before people began to think of migration as a crisis. So it was a different world. And I remember after this, I watched this film. It's a dystopian world. It created this apocalyptic vision of the world. There was a British philosopher. I'm trying to remember his name. He wrote a book called Capitalist Realism. Does anyone remember? Mark Fisher. Thank you. Mark Fisher, one of the best philosophers of the 21st century, died very young, too young. And he actually began his book, Capitalist Realism, with, you got it, you are good. He began the book with Children of Men and quoted either Zizek or somebody else basically saying that how easy it is to imagine the end of the world. And it's harder to imagine the end of capitalism, right, than to imagine the end of the world. And at, the connections between James Coran's film and Fisher's book sort of like brought together this conjoining of forces. The idea of infertility was not simply a biological metaphor. It was a metaphor for imagination, right? How it is hard to imagine a world where people can mutually thrive, where we don't have to make zero-sum assumptions about which babies have the right to be born and which don't have the right to be born. So that was the context in which I watched the film. Now we are in a different era. Mm-hmm. It just seems 2027 is not so far, as you said, it's tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of what seems to be on the minds of a lot of those in power or those close to power at the moment, or at least those with access to obscene amount of wealth and attention grabbing megaphones, is if not fertility rates but birth rates. In a lot of the world's major democracies or major capitalist Western power centers, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that in this current moment and reflect on what sort of anthropological factors might be at play.
Yeah, I think the present moment is one of deep cultural political dissonance. That on one side we see a world of promise where we're told that we're going to be on the Mars, that we're going to have interstellar travel, that we're not meant to die here on this planet, we're just meant to sort of like be seafaring or whatever. And on the other hand, we are letting the world, sort of the earth, die, and slowly and gradually. So this dissonance, but also the dissonance in discourse, where we are continuously being told how societies are dying. Japan, Korea, China. In U.S., we've been told to produce more babies, and at the same time, we see babies dying, literally, in majority of the rest of the world, like where 80%, 90% of the people live. And we have tremendous amounts of access on one side. Access both in terms of A access, right, and E access of resources. And on the other side, there is, starvation, deprivation, and forced deprivation. So I think that if anything, this film sort of brings those themes together. One of the things that, and this is something I teach also, the theological themes in this film are quite, sometimes they can be a sledgehammer type. They're not very nuanced, like, they're in there, and you will see them, and I think you will recognize them, but as P.D. James used to write, and Koran himself has said many times, that the idea was to see if we can rejuvenate a certain, we can move away from the simple idea of hope to a more sort of practical idea of mercy. I mean, you may have heard this term being used over the last few days in a public speech. There was an invocation of mercy, that we need mercy in the present, because of the elementary brutalities and cruelties that we are inflicting or are being subjected to. So mercy is the word sort of that comes to my mind when I think of this film.
And certainly we may or may not see it in various forms. Some of the most striking imagery for me, in my imagination whenever I think of this film, are people in cages, which we've seen in the U.S. not that long ago, but people of all ethnicities and racial identities. And to me, I felt like that was one of the most powerful things watching this film. Is it, there's and extrapolating further to this present moment. One of the terms that's kind of come into vogue, or at least more in the public imagination as far as a near future, is thinking about climate refugees and how that might affect people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnicities and racial identities. And I'm wondering for you, is that anything that's come up in your teaching when examining texts like this?
Yeah, I think that, the world is both sort of a place of mutual thriving, but it's also the only thing we have, right? I mean, earlier we were having a conversation and I was thinking about this movie's Interstellar. Remember Christopher Nolan movie? And the key word in that film, if you remember, is stay, right? That we have to stay.